Well, I have some good news.
Okay.
For you, at least.
For me?
Yeah, for you.
Okay.
There were actually several viewers who agreed with your assessment of the Marantz after hearing it for themselves. It's always nice to have validation. Am I right?
For once I get the validation.
Yes. For example, Tag Connected
Mm.
says that they heard the Model 10s paired with the 801 signatures at Axpona in the Bowers room.
Mm-hmm.
They go on to say, I'm a Marantz fan, and even I could see they were not doing the speakers justice and found the same sonic element as this video. Way too neutral, and that extra punch was not there compared to what I remember from hearing the 800s paired with the Macintosh 9500, which is even cheaper than the Model 10, let alone the Macintosh 12,000.
Oh, the big boy.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
Okay.
then Seb35 says that they listened to the Marantz Model 10 and the Link 10 played through Bowers and Wilkins 803s in a store in a very nice room. They said, I thought I was missing the golden audiophile ears because I just couldn't feel anything.
Yeah.
I was impressed that the B&W's tweeter could be tamed and made smooth, but I missed the excitement and what the fuss of high-end is all about.
I could see that.
And lastly, Billy the Stalker says, my dealer has this amp hooked up to the big B&W 800 speakers.
Okay.
I sat down for a listen and got bored within a few minutes and moved on. Not what I was expecting, and I can't say why I felt this way, but it is what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, the amp's weird like that. It's one of those where it's like if I try and park my personal feelings and biases and tastes aside, there's a lot that I'm like, okay, technically speaking, that's impressive, that's nice. Very few amps sound like that or pull the music apart like that or whatever. But then as soon as I put on a jam instead of, an audiophile recording and I put on a favorite, boy, I'm like checking my watch. I'm pulling out my phone. I'm doing just about anything else but listen. And that to me is not a good thing.
No, it's really not. Well, speaking of bias, I think this is an important question to, ask yourself, and especially as reviewers, to just do a check-in. Do you think that Class D products get looked at differently or more critically because of things like personal bias? One of our viewers' comments had me asking myself this same question, wondering if maybe I was biased against Class D. Syncores, who I'm talking about, the comment they left reads, the emotional aspect of an amplifier can be something very difficult to quantify. I was initially excited to hear the review of the Model 10 until Class D was uttered. Personally, I have not auditioned a Class D product which evokes the intangible like a high-quality Class A or AB product. I kept an open mind during the review and was modestly surprised you reached a similar conclusion to my preconceived bias. So I have to wonder, is my bias against Class D warranted? Is there a technological deficiency present compared to quality Class A or AB competitors? Or is it simply my taste was shaped during the Class A, AB era, and I simply don't care for Class D as it doesn't evoke the qualities of what I've, quote, learned to appreciate? And I thought this was a really great comment and something that everyone should, think about for themselves. I know I'm sure I've been guilty of this at some point, being biased against a product. But to be honest, when it came to the Marantz Model 10, I actually assumed it was Class AB.
Yeah.
I mean, if for no other reason, because I knew it was like $15,000. So I went into our early listening sessions believing that's what I was hearing.
Yeah, I
Only-
kept the details from you.
Only to later find out that it was a Class D product.
Yeah.
So in this particular situation,
Yeah.
I don't think there was bias for
No.
me anyway.
And I get it. And I do think that the vast majority of enthusiasts who are more my age or older, you have more experience with Class A, B than you likely do Class D if you've been in the hobby for any length of time. Now, if you're one of our younger viewers, this may not hold as much water, this statement I just made, as you may have come up with more Class D, honestly, than AB or A. Does that mean that there's a bias? I can only speak for myself, and I would say I'm not biased towards Class D. I just think that Class D, when done right, can be an exceptional experience. And I'll point to my affinity for Bang & Olufsen. Those are the new ones anyway, the new speakers, especially the ones that you've seen on this channel. Those are all Class D powered. And I think they're phenomenal. I think the Marantz M1 is phenomenal. I wouldn't go so far as to say it disguises its Class D pedigree, but it's still a phenomenal product. Now, is it a phenomenal product and Class D because it uses DSP in a more interesting way than other Class D Marantz amplifiers that attempt to treat the tech more or less the same as they would in AB? Or is it more intriguing and am I okay with it because it's, quote, cheap, at $9.99? I don't know. I would probably have to sit down and really give that a think as to which of those two factors may be playing a larger role in my influence of why I'm okay there, not so much on Model 10. But at the end of the day, while these are all really fun thought experiments, we still have to deal with the question at hand, and that is, or the topic at hand, which is just the Model 10. And for me, the Marantz Model 10 just missed the mark. It was very flat to me, and it wasn't a stretch when I said it evoked feelings and memories of my time spent with the NAD M-33. I mean, boy, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if you were to blindfold me, if I would be able to tell the two amps apart. That is how kind of sterile the sound was for me. But getting back to Senkor's question is like, do we have a bias? There's always the potential for a bias. I would like to think that I am not biased, given that I can point to a number of products in our review stable that we rely on regularly that are Class D. They just happen to be implemented or a different style or brand of Class D.
Well, speaking of the NAD M-33,
Okay.
my favorite comment that was left came from PJ.
Mm-hmm.
How dare you trigger me again with an NAD M-33 comment? Arg, LOL. At $15,000, I think I'm shopping the Macintosh MA-12000.
Okay.
Because, well, blue meters and green glowing tubes?
Yeah.
Sign me up. P.S. Anger, hate, quote, how dare you, quote, you're wrong, quote, wrong speakers, quote, get a better blank, and just that should cover it. I hope you and KRISTI are doing well. And
Love
that comment made me laugh. But you know what? Mostly because there were actually a couple of comments along those lines, the jokes.
Yeah.
One of the best was was one that suggested you didn't test the Model 10 with the right speakers.
Yeah.
How dare you use a horn speaker or a bookshelf?
Yeah.
I mean, some people are just so silly.
Yeah. Those types of comments to me I get where they come from because that type of thinking and commentary has permeated hi-fi for decades. But it's just one of those things where it's like, how how does the amplifier or the speaker for that matter, like, know what it is? You know, it's not as if the Klipsch or the Sonus Faber or the SVS is like that scene in Goodwill Hunting, or the amp for that matter, where either one of them is coming to you.
Do you know how easy this is for me? Do you have any fucking idea how easy this is? This is a fucking joke. And I'm sorry you can't do this. I really am, because I wouldn't have to sit here and watch you fumble around and it up.
It doesn't work like that, you know, and no product knows what the other product costs. So I really hesitate to say that, oh, because a product's 10 grand, you have to put a $10,000 speaker on it. I mean, let's just go back to one of the brief comparisons I made in the Model 10 review. Whether you want to look at the Cornwalls as a high-end speaker or you don't, let's face it, at $6-7 grand for the pair, that's a substantial investment for people. I get that you can have more expensive speakers, and I get that there are cheaper ones, but $6 or $7 grand is not something to, sneeze at. And yet the 12-ish $100 deckware with only 2 measly watts just blew the doors off the Model 10. Maybe not an ultimate SPL in room, but between the goalposts of where I like to listen, 70 to 85 dB, kicked its ass.
Yeah, I always find comments like that about this, speaker or system matching, I guess, to be a little bit reaching, and because like, especially with something like a bookshelf, just because something is a bookshelf, being a smaller speaker, not a tower or something, doesn't mean it can't be a challenging speaker to drive.
No.
And can't really test an amplifier's limits.
Yeah.
And I think the Sonus Fabers really did that.
Yeah, look at the Clarity 6.2s from Radiant. Those things were thirsty. Those are arguably thirsty than most towers. So, I mean, yeah, look, system matching or system pairing is important in a few key areas. For example, if you end up with a speaker where the nominal impedance is 4 ohms, that usually means that the impedance could fluctuate down lower than 4 ohms, just as easily as maybe it could fluctuate a little bit higher. That just means that for the majority of its performance or its response or its capability, whatever word you want to ascribe to it, it relatively falls within that 4 ohm window. Well, not every amplifier is really all that capable down at 4 ohms. And so that's where system matching comes in. But the Model 10 is very capable at 4 ohms. I wouldn't be surprised if it has a 2 ohm rating. They just didn't share it. So that's where system matching matters. And then when you couple that with the reported sensitivity of a loudspeaker, Sonus Faber being 85 dB with a nominal impedance of 4 ohms that dips lower than that, that speaker is arguably more demanding and tricky than a Klipsch Cornwall. But, it's just like, yeah. It's like we put the right products with the right amp, and these were the results. And honestly, it didn't matter if I gave it an easier job or a more difficult job. To the Marantz's credit, it sounded the same. It's the neutrality of this amp is arguably beyond reproach. It really didn't matter what I put in front of it, and that, I think, is to its benefit, but also the part that gives me pause, which is this is just how the amp sounds.
Yeah, and it really just comes down to whether or not you like that.
Yeah.
Like with anything.
Yeah.
Anything in life. Well, Hey Fix This has a idea about Class D.
Okay.
They said Class D still feels like a developing technology. Many standard Class D amps struggle with fast transients and can sound harsh during sudden peaks like claps or bangs. To solve this, high-end designs now use complex multi-stage feedback loops that monitor the output, sometimes even after the LC filter, to correct errors with more precision and speed In this Marantz, the feedback loop may be too controlling, smoothing out harshness, but also killing off natural dynamics in the process, parentheses, taming the beast. A firmware update that adjusts the sound mode could help bring some of that dynamic energy back.
I mean, look, I don't have the good fortune of being able to sit with the architects, the designers, and pick their brain for days on end, or sit with them while we listen and just be like, what were you doing here? Class D is not new. It's not developing. It's been around for a hot minute. I think we've entered a new era of Class D. In the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, affordable Class D was kind of in the shadows of hi-fi forums, and so a lot of people didn't realize that there were the emergence of like these chip-based Class D amps that are very popular now. They started in the late 90s to the early 2000s, when at that time, more of the mass market or more readily available Class D amps, I'm going to use like Bel Canto as an example. They were using ICE modules, if I'm not mistaken, but you were still paying $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for an amplifier at that time, which obviously, when you saw how small they were, and then the claims that people made about like they run cool, they do this, they do that, it wasn't so much that I think at first people were like, oh, Class D is too sterile. I think they inadvertently put that sort of size to price argument against it. And so when Class D amps were small, but they still cost relatively the same as Class AB, people were like, oh, what am I getting, for my money? Because the early Bel Canto stuff, I'll admit, I loved it. I had it for quite some time when I was a print writer. Now, fast forward to today, where the very inexpensive TI-based Class D amplifiers are coming to market. Those, I think, have reintroduced the argument, the discussion of, is Class D really as good as Class A or AB? Because they are doing it differently. Not every amplifier using that tech necessarily has all of the little tricks that you just described that maybe Marantz and Purify have done here to try and mask it. They're just pushing it out. And as a result, those amps do have problems with dynamics. Those amps do have issues with transients and things like that. But I would go so far as to say that those are not the same in any way, shape, or form as what Marantz has built here. The Marantz Model 10 is to Class D what the Mark Levinson number 53 was 15 years ago. It is not to Class D what, say, a Fosse is at all.
Well, Mr. Bobsher wants to tackle one of the things you brought up in the review, and that is the age-old debate between measurable sonic accuracy versus emotional impact.
Okay.
Bobsher says, my first knee-jerk reaction is always, hey, hi-fi components are supposed to be accurate. Okay. They should never add or subtract from what's on the recording. The fact that we are now at the point that this issue is finally resolved, except for speakers and vinyl, is good news. I want nothing between me and the music. Just because I fell in love with Zeppelin, Hendrix, or Public Enemy in car stereos or on mediocre 1980s equipment doesn't mean I still want that music, not to mention all the newer stuff, to sound like it did back then. However, I always have to remember that Physical Graffiti, Electric Ladyland, Fear of a Black Planet, and so forth were mixed and mastered using speakers that would be considered pretty lousy today. This is, of course, the, quote, circle of confusion. What exactly did the artists, engineers, and producers intend for me to hear when listening to a bit-perfect digital version of their work on today's equipment? No one knows, not even them. So then it stands to reason that certain kinds of coloration, also called distortion, might be welcomed if it possibly brings me closer to what the people in the studio heard right before saying, we're done, get it to the label. However, again, it seems to me that this kind of, quote, make it sound good to me, not perfect game is best played with the end of the signal chain, that is, the speakers. I really do still want the highest fidelity signal to be reaching my speakers. I can then decide whether and how I want that signal altered by Wilson Audio, Klipsch, KEF, Bang & Olufsen, etc. The interaction between the speaker's design, its size, its placement in the room, and the room itself are plenty of variables to mess with to get a sound I like from that accurate signal.
Yeah.
Heck, I can even add all kinds of EQ to suit my taste if I want to go that route. Give me sonic purity, like this amp or the NAD, and then let me figure out how to make the music move me best.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with that. I don't really know what to add to that. It's such a complete statement. Not so much a question, it's just a complete statement. And I don't disagree with much of what was said, nor the thought experiment that the viewer went on. It is the age-old conundrum amongst enthusiasts. The only thing that I would argue is we have probably been in a realm of, I don't want to say good enough, but of signal purity for quite some time now. Maybe not going back to 70s and 80s, but the early 2000s till now. I think now, much like the megapixel race that hit cameras not too long ago, it's the only way to kind of one up anyone else or what you did before was to put an extra 0.000 in front of certain measurements. After a certain point, understand, like, while it can be measured, it may not be audible. You know, like, there is a finite capability to our ears, to our ear-brain relationship, just as there's a finite capability to our eyeballs, let alone when you take that level of precision and then put it in a real world environment where there's going to be reflective sound, absorptive sound, it's going to be a whole mess of stuff. Ambient, you know, whatever. We don't listen in an anechoic chamber. We don't listen to a graph. So I would argue that, you know, as far as signal purity right up into the speakers being at least what's on the recording, the CD, the stream, the maybe vinyl, there's some variables in there. Obviously, it's a friction-based format. But you get my point. I would say that we've probably been at a level of audible, appreciable perfection for some time. And then the flavor comes from how much distortion maybe do we let through, and how, you know, or how do we handle it, or what little tweaks do we make maybe in the preamp section or something to voice something that may not be 100%. So if you're one of those people that you want to do the voicing, then yeah, seek out the most neutral thing possible. If you're someone that's like, no, I want to, I love the artist's intent, whatever that means, but I also believe in an electronic engineer's design, and I like their approach to music or movies, and that speaks to me. I consider them artists too, so I want to honor their work. Well, then you need to go and look at their products. But as far as your comment on a whole, there's a lot of really good points made.
Well, I thought Tate Upson had a great question.
Okay.
Tate says, what's the difference between the almost boring neutrality of this amp, meaning the Model 10, to the phenomenal perfectness of the KEF R11 Metas? Would this pairing be almost monitor-like or a perfect match? Also, what would happen if you paired this Model 10 to an extremely unneutral speaker with a huge curve? Will it flatten them out? I'm ultimately trying to find the balance between neutral and fun, and how much an amp and what you pair it with affects the overall sound.
Okay. To speak specifically to the KEF R11 Meta, it's a phenomenal speaker. It's arguably one of the best in recent memory at its price. And if you're someone that wants that neutrality, that linearity, that predictability, I still can't fault it. But it goes back to a previous episode we did, you know, reference versus preference. ultimately, which speaker did I choose? I went with the SVS Titan. Now, the SVS Titan does not, quote, measure as linearly as the KEF. But that's some of the reason why when I lived with both speakers for, I don't know, 3-4 months, trying to make a decision of which one was I ultimately going to keep, because I don't have the room for 2 5-foot tall, tower speakers that kind of scratch the same itch. I erred on the side of preference, because I kept finding myself smiling, laughing, jamming a little bit, bobbing my head with the SVS, not to take anything away from the KEF. Now, I don't have the R11 metas to put on the Marantz. I have to imagine that would have been a very precise, very exacting, but ultimately I probably, to me, I don't know if that would have been a good pairing for me and my tastes.
I don't think it would have been a good
I don't
pairing.
think it would have. Maybe technically marvelous, but ultimately enjoyable for me or how we like to listen, probably not that great. Does the Marantz, quote, flatten out an imperfect speaker? No. That's the thing. This is one of the things about measurements that is, I guess I'm going to say, misleading, because I have Model 10 measurements on, Sonus Faber speakers, but I also have I also have those Sonus Faber speakers measured on Macintosh gear. And the graph, if you will, lines up pretty much the same. So in terms of sweeps, in a measurement signal, in terms of sweeps, these amps are drawn largely the same line. The problem is we don't listen to sweeps. We listen to music, and music is ever changing. It's dynamic. The load, the just everything about it is nothing like a signal sweep. And that's why, is the Model 10 going to take a Klipsch speaker like this and go like this because I describe it to you as neutral? No. I'm willing to bet the measurement of the Cornwall 4 using the Model 10 in its purest direct mode is still going to produce, the Rocky Mountains, because that's just what Klipsch is. And then if I go and I grab a 1950s-ish tube amp, with distortion, like the sweep will probably not be the same, but close enough that the differences may not be visual enough, they may be the same. But the experience of listening to music through either product is going to be markedly different. Even though on paper, maybe the graphs look the same. And that's where we get into the subjective versus objective kind of stuff. Because on paper, maybe the distortion figures are better with the Model 10 versus an Audio Lab or whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the audible experience in room is remotely the same.
Well, I just thought Tate's question kind of spurred something in me.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I first read their comment, I was really thinking more about how, excuse me, I'm still a little under the weather. I was thinking more about like how I could, in some instances, prefer a more neutral speaker, but maybe I don't prefer a more neutral amp. And just what is happening there. But I do think you just kind of explained it, like the subjective versus objective, the measurement data that you might glean from a speaker never tells the full story.
Yeah.
And what the sound ultimately produces is going to be so so up to the individual, and how once it hits their ears, how do they feel about it? What do they prefer? But I did think it was an interesting topic, and maybe something that we can think about more in the future, and just like what is happening, like how can you in one breath say, oh, I prefer this neutral speaker over this, you know, like clearly not neutral speaker.
Yeah, like Eclipse Cornwall 4.
Yeah. But then when you look at an amp or some other product, you might feel completely differently.
Yeah. Welcome to Hi-Fi.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess that's just the beauty of having options, you know?
Yeah.
And I've said this repeatedly over the years, like how important it is to know what kind of listener you are.
Yeah.
And maybe when you watch a video, maybe the price isn't in your wheelhouse, or maybe the brand isn't something you would tend to go for. It's still helpful to watch a review because you get to learn more about that reviewer's personal tastes and listening habits, and like what kind of music they typically use to test a product, and that can inform you then at some point in your purchasing decision, like how you might ultimately feel about a product.
Yeah.
And I think that can help you in the long run because, I mean, I can't tell you how often we see people in the comments saying, well, I don't have any place near me where I can go hear this, you know, and so you might be having to make some of your purchases blind, meaning, you know, you're just ordering them online and they get them, you know, they show up and then, you know, you hope for the best. Sour Singer poses another very great question.
Okay.
They want to know what controls the sound of an amp. And they say, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't the preamp control more of the sound versus the amp? Wouldn't a tube preamp alter the sound in the way that you would like? I was under the knowing that speakers and preamp control 99% of the sound you hear. So as long as you have a clean amp, it only amplifies what is being sent. It doesn't really add any sound. More expensive amps are really just cleaner and more stable under heavy load, but sonically, most amps do not change much, especially with a tube preamp. That is what changes the sound.
I mean, yes, in theory, an amplifier's sole job is to amplify the signal, and assuming that it's the last thing in the chain before it goes out to the speaker. So everything that came before it arguably has an opportunity to influence what it's receiving. Would tubes make it better? Maybe, maybe not. It really depends, you know. Again, you're getting into the argument maybe of, is distortion or a little bit of distortion or the right kind of distortion really pleasing, a good thing, whereas other people are going to say, you don't know. I have to talk about the Marantz Model 10 as it sits, and it's an integrated, meaning, yeah, there is a preamp internal to it. It's two pieces in one. And as a result, those two obviously have an effect on one another. But I have to also imagine that they were voiced or considered in tandem. And as a result, the cumulative total of what's coming out of the Marantz Model 10 is what the designers intended. And for me, that is just a really by the book kind of vanilla sound. And again, that's going to appeal to a lot of people who have that more purist mindset that nothing in the electronic chain should influence, change, alter, monkey with the signal in any way, shape, or form, in which case, and then that is the Model 10 in theory, taking it out to the speakers, and then you're on your own. But to those people that want the clearest possible signal and then want to make it their own using EQ, tone controls, things like that, the Model 10 may not be the right amp for you in that regard either because of its limitations. I mean, yes, you get treble and bass and trim, aka balance, but you don't get any higher functionality than that either. So you run the risk of having to inject another piece of electronics into there just to alter, change, or maybe distort the signal, which then flies in the face of purity, 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 and brings us back to, is a certain type of distortion actually pleasurable? It's a chicken and egg kind of conversation, and ultimately, at the end of the day, you just have to like what you like, and it's okay to not like what maybe a lot of other people like or are pushing for in the modern era, or that's popular today, but maybe it won't be popular tomorrow. You just have to be true to yourself, know what kind of listener you are, like my baby says, and go with that, because you're going to be happier long term listening to yourself and hear, and then following the ever changing tides of this hobby and what is popular one minute to the next.
I mean, I think that's a really good point, and it brings me to, I want to share what I felt about the Model 10.
Yes, please.
I mean, I know the Model 10 is a very well-made product.
Yes.
But I just didn't connect with it either.
Mm-hmm.
It felt, or I guess, I don't know, it just made music sound smaller to me. And for the record, I actually really enjoy Marantz amplifiers and receivers.
Mm-hmm.
But the majority of those have been Class A, B, with the exception of like the M1.
Right.
That uses Class D, and I freaking love that amp.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to blame Class D for my, disappointment.
Yeah. And you can't.
So to speak, in the Model 10. It's just a different product. And like you said, without being able to talk to the engineers, and to say, hey, what was your intention here? Or, it's impossible to know, or like try to figure out what's at play. All I can tell you is it just didn't register with me.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless of what you think of the sound, in my opinion, at 15 grand, I want a product to feel special.
Yeah.
And as you alluded to in your review, I just believe that Marantz pulled up a little short with this product. And I think that if they want to play in this field, this higher end field, and I think they should.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with them attempting to market to a higher end clientele.
Mm-hmm.
They just have to they have to consider everything.
Yeah.
And I think they're not the only brand that falls short.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of companies that they do a great job at one thing, but then they just sort of skimp on something else, like whether it's the remote or the presentation of the product, the packing material isn't maybe really good.
Yeah.
Those little things matter when you're spending $15,000 on something.
Yeah. They really do.
I want to get into a couple of comparison questions that viewers wanted to hear from you about. Anthony Stevenson wasn't the only person who wanted a comparison to the Technics R1000. The question was, I'm guessing you would prefer the Technics over the Marantz. I mean, I would.
Yeah, I would too. The Technics employs a little bit of, has a little bit more DSP capability. It has some other things that Technics does. It's not dynamically stunted. If you're a vinyl enthusiast, I could make the argument that the Technics, it does things with its phono preamp, phono stage, and digital wizardry that is amazing. Now, if you're a purist, you're probably like, no, I hate that. Nevertheless, it is a different type of an experience, and one that I absolutely love. And the fact that I can have that experience for $5,000 less in an equally, capable product in the R1000, I'm picking that every time.
And isn't it a Class D
amplifier?
Yeah,
it's Technics version of Class D. Yeah, their Geno engine.
So those are very comparable.
Yeah, and it's $1 under 10 grand. So even if you're on the fence about, which one should I try, and you have to buy one and decide if you like it or not, and then return it in order to get the other one, I'd start with the Technics. I really would.
I agree. Another question came from Patrick. I'd also be interested in a comparison to the Yamaha M-5000. And actually, a few others asked about the AS3200, so maybe you can comment on both of those amps.
5000 I can't help you with because I don't know that product. 3200, Very comparable. Obviously, the 3200 is Class AB. I don't think it's as technically powerful on paper, but I don't think that's really ultimately going to matter. I think you're going to get the same separation and attention to detail and quiet backgrounds that you get with the Marantz on the Yamaha, but the Yamaha's, I think, going to have a fuller sounding bass, going to have a little bit more snap, although I will admit the Yamaha is not going to be snappy. We're not talking Krell level of just wringing its neck in terms of control. So probably somewhere a little bit better than the Marantz, but maybe not as D'Agostino-like or Past Labs-like, which could be a great middle ground for a lot of people. Visually, I do like the simplicity of the Marantz a little bit more than, say, all of the knobs and meters and dials that are on the front of the Yamaha, but I get it. That vintage vibe is still very attractive. And for me, the Marantz, while I like the simplicity, minimalism of it, I don't think it's as special as it needs to be at 15 grand. Because let's face it, the casework, I get that it's not the same. Don't come for me. I get that it's not the same, but to the uninitiated, it looks like they used the case from a Cinema 50. It's not, but it looks it. And that's a problem for me. So to each their own on the style. Which one would I prefer? I'm probably picking the Yamaha, especially considering I think it's like 7 grand. It's like half the price. For me, it's probably going to resonate a little bit more emotionally.
I think that really covers it.
I really liked this discussion.
I think there was some really great comments and some good points raised.
Mm-hmm.
The Marantz, I still encourage you to go listen to it.
Yeah.
If you're looking for something along the lines that it offers,
Mm-hmm.
and your budget, maybe you just want to go hear something that costs a little bit more to see, as someone else and another viewer commented, like what the fuss is all about.
Yeah, for sure.
It will give you a place to compare other things too. And I think that's really important when you're trying to decide what is going to appeal to you and like how to spend your money.
Yeah.
I don't think the Marantz is a bad product.
No, you can't call it a bad product.
It's not. And I know that there's going to be people that watch this or that watched your review and think, like your thoughts, your opinions have ruined the Marantz's ability to sell the product, which I think is utter horse.
Yeah.
You know what?
Yeah.
I mean, while I would love that to know we have some sort of effect like that, I just don't think it's true. I don't think that's reality.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the review should hopefully give you a better idea of what to expect.
Yeah.
But like I said, I don't think it's a bad product. I think that if you like a neutral amp, you're going to get it with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do also think there's other options.
There are a lot of other options.
And there's a lot of things within Marantz's own stable of products that might appeal to you as much.
Yeah.
While also saving some money.
Yeah. And one of the next Marantz things that we have coming up is their home theater, their flagship home theater separates, which a couple of people pointed out. Are they going to be as good as this? Are they going to be different from this? But at a minimum, getting the separates are cheaper than this, in which case, why not go with that and have the added flexibility of Dirac and all this other stuff? And that's one of the things that we'll tackle we'll tackle soon enough, not right away, but we do have that review coming as well.
All right. Well, I think that puts this one to bed. This was Unplugged 38.
38. Wow.
I know.
All right.
We're just churning through them. I can't. What are we in, May?
Yeah, May.
Oh man, this whole year feels like
this is our January at this point. We just started the year. We're just starting our year.
Pretty much. We've had some things that have come up, and to everybody that's left comments and checked in about how I'm doing and how my parents are doing. I just want you to know I really appreciate that. Sometimes as a reviewer or someone with a channel like this, it can feel kind of isolating.
Yeah.
So when people check in and really truly want to know, like, hey, how are you doing, or how are things going, it does mean a lot.
Yeah.
And I just want to say thank you for that. But that's it.
That's it. All right, guys.
The episode is over.
Episode is over. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Really appreciate it. Remember, we have a brand new video on Sunday. You won't want to miss that one. But until then, enjoy the rest of your Friday. And we'll see you guys Sunday. Bye.